We've got about 10 minutes now for maybe up to 15 for discussion, questions and so on. So I'd like to throw it open immediately. Just noting from my point of view anyway, there's a lot of diversity here. I'm not hearing that South-South cooperation is this monolithic thing that's different from the DAC. It seems to be very different from itself. So let's start over here and then I'll come gradually across the room.
Eleanor Wakefield from DFID. Notwithstanding your comment, Matthew, about the diversity within South-South cooperation, we do hear a lot about the differences between ODA and South-South cooperation. I would be really interested to hear from each of the speakers about what they see as the main similarities between those instruments. I think in view of the global challenges we're facing, highlighted this morning, we actually need to turn the question around and say, what are the areas of common ground that we can work together on? Thank you.
Okay. Can I add to that a question which is coming to us from our wider audience, which is asking us whether you think your development cooperation is likely to become more like DAC cooperation in future or less like it? Next question. We'll take about 4. Neil.
Thank you very much, Neil Cole, Cadbury. I suppose my question is informed by the group of, or the client that we work with, and that is finance ministries across Africa, and mainly senior budget officials, but also aid managers in finance and planning ministries. I think in the presentations that we've heard, and in particular the presentation from China, is that it comes across as if we are looking at 2 distinct models that have been, where the one has been more successful than the other because the other has not done or followed the same patterns that the other one has followed. So I see, lots of successes in the kind of investments that China has made in Africa, but those successes are certainly not because of the absence of some of the things that traditional DAC donors have undertaken, or the models that they have pursued. The reason why there are now more roads in Africa, more water reticulation plants, etc., is not because of the absence of good governance or the absence of transparency. It's because China has taken a decision to invest in those sectors. So that's the view that I take. And then the last point that I think is important, and not only for China but for other countries that are involved in South-South cooperation, is that transparency, use of country systems, mutual accountability, these are things that countries who are the recipients of aid have fought for a very long time. These things have not been brought about because DAC donors felt that these things are important in the partnership. And the one fear that one has, and certainly in the client that we work with, is that it feels as if the hard-won battles, starting in Paris, moving on to Accra and now Busan, it's as if we're giving up on a lot of the ground that has been won in terms of transparency, use of country systems, because there's now a call for a different regime to be in place. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking too long with the question.
Turn that into a question, which is, are you going to engage with the transparency and mutual accountability agenda more than you have in the past? I had a question in the front here.
Hi, Maya Forstatter. The countries that are coming to the forefront of South-South cooperation are also, not coincidentally, the countries that are facing the greatest challenge and opportunity around transforming their own economies to green growth, low carbon development. And I know we're having a later session about climate finance, but South-South cooperation under formal definitions won't be classed as climate finance, but I'd be interested to hear from any or all of you sort of how your South-South cooperation is linking to the transformation of your own economies, and I think you talked about joint ventures and you talked about the hybrids between states and markets. I'd be interested to hear some of that.
Whole huge extra subject you're raising there. Yeah, I see two more. My apologies. Okay, we'll do two there and then one at the back over there, and that's it.
Hi, I'm Kathy from BBC Somali Service. I just want to say, Professor Lee, I was born in a Chinese-built hospital, went to Chinese-built school, also went to Chinese-built theater, Chinese-built stadium. Most of our infrastructure was built by Chinese. And now the Turkey is doing what the Chinese used to do in our country. I just want to say that the Chinese model is, I think, is the best.
I'm going to be
you will please me.
I'm going to be gender imbalanced because we're very gender imbalanced on the panel, and let women ask questions for the men.
Thank you very much. My name is Karen Jorgensen. I head the Peer Review, Evaluation and Engagement Division in the Development Cooperation Directorate of the OECD. That's a big mouthful. What it means is that I conduct peer reviews of all the members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, and I also manage the work that the DAC does with countries that are not yet members of the DAC. It strikes me, if I may have a comment that will maybe challenge some of our panelists. First of all, I think it isn't just about semantics. We really need new terminology. But when we talk about traditional donors, I'm not sure whose traditions we're talking about. Because the principles that govern South-South cooperation were basically set out in Bandung in 1955, which was, more than 5 years before the DAC was even formed. And I think the principles that have developed over time actually converge much more than they diverge. We did a study recently, well, just before Busan actually, looking at all the principles that had come out of South-South cooperation conferences and what had come out of Rome, Paris, Dakar, etc. And there is a great deal of overlap. So I think it's time we start talking about what actually unites us rather than divides us. I think there are many similarities in drivers. When I listen to all of the panelists talk about what has motivated their aid over time or their cooperation over time, it isn't different really from what has motivated the members of the Development Assistance Committee. I think I think what we need to focus on is what can each bring to the table. And you talk about the DAC as if that's a uniform and sort of singular entity, but it isn't. There are 24 very different members of that committee, all of whom have different types of programs and are organized in different ways. I think what we need to focus on is how we bring convergence to this, how we can get the most out of what everybody has to offer. We're engaged right now in a study on triangular cooperation, where we have done a desk study. We conducted a survey where we asked 180 different countries and organizations to reply, and we had a 60% response rate, which I think is very high for that kind of survey, because I think there is a great deal of recognition that this is a pathway for the future. We also recently had a brainstorming meeting hosted by Portugal that brought together the 3 different constituencies. I hope that this work will bear some fruit and go into the global partnership debate, because that is where we can all come together and think about how we can drive different kinds of arrangements for the future.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, well, I've been given 5 more minutes, so I'll have one back there and then the one woman along there.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask each of you in the panel, what do you think about the discussions about the new global development goals post 2015? Is it important or not? First question. Second question, if it is important, what is the most important thing for you to put into those goals? Thank you.
Okay, and right at the back over there.
Yes, thank you. I'm Juanita Olarte from the Colombian Cooperation Agency. And I would like to focus on one of the common challenges that have been exposed through the very interesting presentation, which is how to measure impact of South-South cooperation. And for us in Colombia, we share that challenge also within our South-South and Triangular Cooperation. And I would like to ask the panelists, how are you doing in your countries to measure or to quantify South-South cooperation? Because in order to have the impact of our South-South cooperation also, or mutual accountability, we also need to quantify and know how much we are investing in technical cooperation. As the Brazilian colleague mentioned, you were focusing on training and technical cooperation modality, but that kind of cooperation is very difficult for us in Colombia, for example, to measure it. So I would like to know how in your countries you are doing this. Thank you.
Okay, we've got about 7 minutes for everybody to answer the questions put together. So please don't feel you have to answer every question, just answer the ones which really grab you. Shall we start with Paolo?
Oh. About the similarities, we have at least 2 questions about that. I do think that we have several similarities with DAC countries, but I do think that in Brazil we share not a similarity in terms of practice, but a similarity in terms of a problem, which is accountability. For us, this kind of role is quite new. So what we are facing now is the complete lack of institutions into oversee, or at least or to control or to influence the process in which Brazil is entering. So just to give 2 examples, there is a project that is being developed by Brazil. It's a triangular project called Pro Savana. I guess it is a well-known project, but it is quite disputed, or at least contested in Brazil. Why is that? Because there is another project developed in Brazil called Pro Cerrado. O Cerrado is an environment in Brazil which was completely destroyed by the monoculture of soya. Or among other things. And this project is being exported to Africa. But the problem is civil society in Brazil is starting to complain about that and try to influence one way or another the outcomes of this entire story. But we have no institutions, we have no branch of the government to address or with which discuss. So I would say if we have a similar country as DAC countries, we share a similar problem. And what we have to learn and to develop ourselves now are the mechanisms of decision and oversight or peer review, if you want, of these projects. The entry in the OECD, it's not an option over the table, I guess. About impact measurements. We don't have any in Brazil. We have only reports, but we have no idea about the impacts of the projects. We have for many years a program giving scholarships for students in Africa and Latin America to come to Brazil, and this program assumes that the students will go back to their countries and help to develop their countries. What these students or these former students are doing now, nobody knows. Nobody knows about the impact of the scholarships that we are giving for students for many years, which is a shame, which I think it is something that Brazil will address in the near future. Is being discussed in the country, and it is something that I guess we will address in the future. Thank you.
Okay, Mexico, Gerardo.
Yes, well, I will start by addressing a bit this question on the difference of the ODA and South-South cooperation. I think, I mean, there's no big difference. Actually, in Mexico, we are now trying to make an account of all the aid we're doing. And then we have kind of two columns. One where we can see if it's ODA-like, and we can report it to the DAC. But other column with other type of cooperation that the DAC doesn't recognize as ODA. For example, if we give some, we have helped New York at some point, no? For example, or we have, sometimes we have horizontal cooperation where we give money but receive money at the same time. Things that are not clearly ODA, but I mean, basically, there's no big difference, and it would be easy for, I mean, complicated in technical terms and all this, but it would be easy for all of us to see what is ODA-like and what is not ODA-like. On the other hand, for example, there are certain categories of ODA that you consider ODA, and if we had a say, we wouldn't like it to be ODA. For example, all the money that the US is giving us to combat the drug trafficking, which is a problem that very much relates to them, we wouldn't consider that ODA, but you do. So we would like actually to have a say on that. Let's say it like this. Then on the question of convergence that Karen was talking, I think it's true. I mean, I think there are lots of we're converging, and it doesn't mean that the south is converging to the north necessarily. It's both ways, and I'm sure that you agree with that. For example, the sovereignty principle came before you adopted this idea of ownership. Of course, they are not the same, but it's you that are coming to us and not the other way around. We use cooperation from the very beginning, and now you used aid, and now you're using cooperation as us. And as Andrew was saying this morning, now you are probably also going to start this type of packages as the Chinese are doing, where you don't know exactly where the aid content of a package is. In Mexico, we'll do that, and probably the North is coming back to their own, to things that they did in the 60s, and now the southern providers are doing. So I do think that there's lots of room for convergence, and that we should stress our commonalities rather than our differences. And finally, well, on the MDGs, I would say that for us, the very important thing that we should add to the MDGs is inequality, which is more from a recipient point of view for Mexico. And about impact, I think we are in the same, exactly the same as Brazil. We don't know, but we should start knowing a bit about that.
Okay, Shoaib, okay.
Thank you very much. I think for us, we are members of the OECD DAC, and we're signatories to the Paris Declaration. So we are bound by some of the good governance principles of the so-called traditional donors, and we will adhere to that. Our own legislation demands that we remain accountable, we do things in a transparent way, those kind of things. So we've tried to embed that in our philosophy. We've done this quite successfully. I mean, we are a recipient of aid, and the way we do that is based on the same principles that the traditional donors use, and we've done it quite successfully. I think where we differ is on the areas of development cooperation, what the DAX defines as the sectors. Clearly, we want a much wider range of sectors. And if you look at the strategy paper of the EU on the sectors that they are advocating, they coalesce with what we want to do in Africa: aid, trade, capacity building for finance, etc., etc. So we don't want to limit ourselves to only what the DAC is defining as the sectors. And clearly, as South Africa, we have to get involved in areas like peacekeeping, peacemaking, humanitarian aid, good governance issues. There's no choice for us. So we have to get involved in those. So that's the one area we differ. The other areas are around how we go about defining those things. Clearly, we are saying as Africa, we want no externally imposed solutions. We want to be part of the solution, part of defining that solution. And the whole NEPAD philosophy is based on this. And we have the programs either at a regional or continental level. And we are saying to donors or partners, or however you want to define them, for a long time now, that here are programs that we have developed. These are programs that are supported by our countries, and these are programs that we would like you to support. And there is a great deal of support taking place, but clearly no externally imposed solutions. And let's have a dialogue about what you do in our countries. And that's the same approach that we are going to use in South Africa. We are going to make sure that, or we want to ensure that all the programs we develop have the official sanction of that particular country. And I think the question that my colleague here spoke about, where there's a dissonance between the people and the state, is a really difficult question for us to deal with, because it means that it carries a high degree of risk to use that approach. So we want to ensure that all the programs we do have the sanction, have the agreement of the partner country, and that's how we're going to ensure sustainability and ownership. And they must bring something to the party as well. At the end, we want to have a program and a project that leaves a better capacity there for it to be sustainable than when we came in. So I think those are the major differences or similarities, if you want to put it that way, between what maybe the traditional donors are doing and how we're going to approach it.
Finally, I'd like just to respond to all those questions, two aspects. One is that in terms of coherency, what Karen just mentioned. And I think that we have to also, from Chinese side, we have to also realize that international development community is no longer dominated only by the Western system. It has been actually developed jointly over last decades, that merge with complex of ideas, everything, interest. And we have to also see the voices of developing countries, recipient countries, and their ownership has been greatly enhanced and built. So from Chinese side, we have to always advise our government to say, don't see the international development community is the Western development community. So that is our position, to actually come closer working as a partnership. I'm going to address your question, that what does it mean this global partnership program? So I'm personally promoting this. China should be part of this global partnership program. If you want to have voice, you have to come in, because you are now powerful, you have a lot of money, you have to, if you feel you are supporter of these recipient countries like Africans, you've been there, sitting on the table, balance and leverage it with Western powers. So that is something which I consider is the way that China should work with its DAC members in whatever forms. And a secondly, I would say the differences. And the differences means that China's experiences, China has no experiences in various things like accountability, like governance, democracy, labor union, labor standard with our own development process. We don't have that experiences. So we cannot tell our African friends, please do high level of labor union. No, we can't do. We don't know this. So that is problem where we are criticized by Western friends to say you have to be careful for your standard, for your practice, your conduct, your ethic, and we don't understand. And we said, well, we have done nothing wrong. So we are requested by African friends, we give the money, why you criticize? So we have this difference. We have to understand this difference. But at the same time, what Western aid does not have experiences for development. And you have a lot of experiences to set up human rights, to set up social provision programs, but you don't have experiences setting these special economic zones, doing development, everything. That was experiences 100 years ago and 50 years ago in Europe. So when people coming to the African, the young people like my age, they have no experience about development. My father had, I don't have. So that kind of, what I call the conflict between the experiences and as well as the your system has this what I call domestic political driven issues, which you have this free elected democratic system which does not allow government to do anything which you feel necessary. So those are the differences I would say. China or many emerging economies would also share a little bit, not completely, but I would say that difference remains. And in the end, lastly, I would suggest that in order to work into real effective partnership, and we do have common goals, we do have all these similar ideas. China is not going to provide aid to make any destructive roles, and we are helping, and Brazil's helping, all people helping for poverty reduction, everything. So in order to do it, that we should understand first the differences, politically, socially, culturally. And I also take Japanese case and Korea case. And they should have very special values within the DAC, and to actually help us to understand, what DAC's roles, understanding, because we could have easily communicated with Japanese and Korea culturally. Then we have communicated with Nordic, with British, with American, politically. So, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I was asked as chair to draw conclusions, but I'm not going to trespass on lunch for more than about 1 minute. I think for me what was refreshing was to hear more about the similarities and the convergences. Perhaps in the terms of reference for the session you were asked to focus on the differences, but we got to the convergences, and I think we need to be realistic about that. But as you said, Professor Lee, if we can really analyse the differences well and the reasons why you have different policies, we'll get to the convergences fairly quickly. What really also impressed me is the openness to learning that's coming out of this. I think there's a very strong wish, particularly to move forward on monitoring and evaluation. It's something I know also in New York at the level of the DGs of Development Cooperation for South-South, in working with the South-South Cooperation Bureau and UNDP. That's also been expressed very strongly. So I really hope that we can move forward on that across a whole range of countries in the next few years, particularly on impact measurement and so on. For me, I see it happening on the ground. I see China changing what it's doing, untying its aid in Ethiopia, working with a lot more local Ethiopian labour because it's realised that it's cheaper to do that than to import Chinese labour. Using Ghanaian environmental standards to check whether dams and other power issues are okay or not, because they exist and they're strong. So I see that learning happening, but I don't see it being written down, I don't see it being spread. So I'm sure, certainly speaking partly on behalf of the UN, I'm sure they want to spread that learning, and I'm sure ODI wants to carry on spreading that learning, and we should definitely be all working together to make sure that we learn from best practices.